So, welcome to this presentation. Thank you so much for being here. Before I introduce the topic, I would like to start with a little bit of a story. I mentioned this one before. Recently, when I got back home, my 14-year-old son had some friends over, and one of them was just hanging out on the side, watching something on his phone. And I just listened in a little bit what was going on, and I'm hearing somebody talk over videos, some sort of TikTok or like YouTube Shorts or something like that. And I was like, okay, what is this? And take a little closer look. And it's a video of a skateboarding or snowboarding game. So it's a gaming video, but what the voiceover is talking about, it has nothing to do with the game itself. It's telling the story about how, don't you also feel that feminism has gone too far, right? Like women nowadays, they want it all. They want you to hold the door open to pay for dinner, and also they get the jobs easier because of the rates and everything. And this has gone too far and we need to stop this. Can you even be a boy anymore? And it's a really sort of strange experience to watch this happen, right? It's like the story being told over gaming has nothing to do with the game itself. And it's something that this friend of my kid listens to or watches, a white, fairly sort of middle class, everything is going fine so far child in Visby, right? It's like, okay, interesting intersection. What is going on? Like trying to figure out a little bit more. What are you watching there? What is happening? Oh, it's just content. Just like normal, nothing out of the ordinary, normal stuff. It's like quite shocking. So we have a little bit of a conversation about that. I also asked if it's okay if I use that story later to present about it. He was okay with that. But it got me thinking a little bit. And this is also not the only story. It's just the one there where this came closest to me personally. We'll pick up a number of other spaces where this happens as well in a minute. So yes, welcome to this presentation. It's called 5 Clicks Away from a Gaming Video, Radicalization, Resistance, and Responsibility. My name is Patrick Prax. I'm Associate Professor here at the Game Design Department. I have a PhD in Media and Communication Studies, where I've been studying co-creative game design in Uppsala in the Media and Informatics and Media Department. If you want to learn more about that, then I have a TED Talk that summarizes it quite neatly from a while back. I've also been doing some work around problematic gaming, which is, I think, a more sensible way to talk about game addiction that decenters the games and the gamer and talks more about the context. And recently, I've been working around questions of sustainability in game design education with a GDC talk about the topic. Last year, on Almedalsveckan, we organized an event that's called The Antidote to Fake News and Propaganda, ? Critical Media Literacy in a Time of Crisis. So continuing that thought here a little bit and taking it into this topic, media literacy, what could that help, right? Obviously, that is one of the things that I'm decrying was lacking with my son's friend there a little bit. Like, what is going on? Oh, this content. Okay, that's a strange answer. Like, everything is content, right? So could we maybe think about these sort of issues through a perspective of media literacy? Media literacy itself means being able to read. Media literacy means understanding how a particular medium shapes cultural production. And that can go a lot deeper than just reading. It can mean that we want to understand the technological and sort of production logics behind that, right? A game affords you other ways of expressing yourself compared to a movie or a theater piece. But there's also economic logics that are part of this. So is there something that we could bring in from media literacy to address these issues? And again, I'll unfold them in a moment a little bit more broadly. And here we can think about digital literacy initiatives in education and where we could bring them in to help out a little bit. Like, would it be enough, would it work to educate kids in school so that they could learn about what is going on here? TikTok Shorts, very, very strong emotional, quick content. It's hard to maybe reflect. How is this made? How does the algorithmic presentation of these sort of contents link into others? It gets saved that you watch this. Similar things get presented to you afterwards, sort of you drift away. Could we talk about that? Yes, that could be interesting. That could solve some of this, but not everything, right? There's more going on. I mentioned the TikTok example. Another case where I stumbled across this as a topic that bubbled up really intensely was when I tried to talk to people and groups around this island to see what kind of needs there would be for media literacy education. And one of the conversations I had was with ungdomshus in Grobo, which is more of the, I guess in Swedish it's utsatta områden, right? It's like a lower socioeconomic status area. And I visited the pedagogues there and just asked, okay, so how do you see media literacy issues, or what is going on with the kids that you meet every day? The stories that they mentioned first was, okay, of course we would like our kids to understand that things you put online stay there forever, that you need to be careful with putting out pictures, things like that. And that was all fine and made sense to me. And then I also probed a little bit. It's like, okay, so how do you feel about political radicalization online? Like how, and it was like, yes, that's what we need. So that was interesting to me, that there was this really strong reaction of, okay, so yeah, we have this issue. We didn't even present this to you when you asked, because maybe they didn't conceive of that as a thing, but yes, that came up. So that threw me off a little bit, or surprised me, because so far my approach had mostly been that I wanted to have this conversation about media production, right? About media literacy, about oftentimes political economy. How are games made? How are social media made? Who makes money through them, and how does that influence how they as platforms can function for your self-expression, for your political activity, or maybe how they can instead shape you instead of citizens as commodities or as customers? How can that be a problem, right? So that would be a political economy debate about media and about games. But I'm not sure that that is really the only thing that we need to have anymore, right? So far, that would be a talk from a media researcher about the political economy of media platforms. But I think I would still owe you the title promising 5 Clicks to Fascism. So let's take a closer look at that. A while back, a video from the community itself came out that named something the PewDie Pipeline. PewDiePie being the, at that point, biggest streamer in the world. I'm not sure if that probably has changed. And his sort of slow fall from grace and drift towards the political right, having to do with making jokes that paying people in Africa to put on anti-Semitic signs and making videos about that, and then like this sort of slow movement. And the argument this video here made, it's like, it's not research, but it's an interesting sort of way of thinking through this, is that communities, also these sort of fairly big communities, and creators can be pushed by loud voices in their community that give them feedback to a particular political direction, experiencing that, okay, so this gives me positive feedback, so I create more of this kind of content, and then slowly shifting the community where people who dislike that or disagree with that might silently leave, others join, and there's a possibility to sort of purposefully shift a space, like a gaming space, like a community like that. So that was kind of an interesting perspective here, that this could happen maybe even with something as big as the following of PewDiePie. But how does that something in the end like this necessarily relate to the notion of fascism? Before I get into that for real, I want to also point out that, of course, I'm choosing my target here, and anything that has to do with misinformation and propaganda online has to be pointed out that this doesn't only go in one direction. One example where recently I realized my own vulnerability that was kind of eye-opening was that a friend of mine on Facebook posted a link that showed that in Germany, the police had been measuring speed in front of a school, but they felt that life is hard enough for drivers already. So instead of measuring 30 kilometers per hour and giving tickets, they measured 50, and that should be fine as well. And I saw this post, and I clicked an angry face, and I went about thinking, man, the police is stupid. They aren't protecting the children. They are nice to drivers. And I didn't think about that at all anymore. It was just like a click, whatever, zoom on, like a small thing. And then the next day, he posted that, whoops, sorry, the thing that I had on my timeline yesterday, that was fake news. I saw that being debunked. That never happened. And I'm like, wow. I didn't have a second of doubt. Like in retrospect, it sounds stupid. Why would it? But it's just like, I swallowed that hook, line, and sinker. Right? I didn't reflect for a second. I was like, yeah, that happened. It's on Facebook. It must be true. Right? Like, and it was the right thing to go through my defenses, not too far, not too critical, not saying, oh, the police is shooting people again or whatever. I would wait a second, is that true? But telling something that's a little bit benign, that is like just nudging me a little bit further left, right? A little bit further anti-authoritarian, hitting me already where I am sort of vulnerable to this, because this is where I stand politically, and making use of that, right? That was the right bullet to penetrate my defenses in that sense. And I didn't think twice about it. And that made me like, okay, sure, that is the time when I get to notice this, but how many times does this happen to me without that somebody then posts the next day, oh, this was actually wrong, right? This must be going on all the time to all of us, right? And here this is factually wrong. This is not even pertaining to a particular spin of a story, a particular framing of the event and what's going on here. So I am not making the argument at all that this is only going on in one direction. Instead, I think that really radicalization pushes in both sides in different directions. I am focusing on one side here because that is what I'm seeing more in the games community. And I also think that, and this is my personal political preference, well, fascism is like kind of more dangerous than anti-authoritarian sentiments. But of course, that is open to debate depending on how you see that. So now we will, however, try to follow and understand a little bit what I mean with really 5 clicks from something like maybe a slightly anti-feminist gaming video to sort of this heart of darkness. And here's a trigger warning. There's going to be anti-Semitic and racist content. There's going to be very sexist language. There's going to be language that is very, very very homophobic. So if that's something that you don't want to see, then it's completely fine if you leave, and so that you're aware, right? So this is what I consider sort of one of the, like, it's really the darkest areas around games community. Gamergate was, whoops, not quite so far. Gamergate was one of the places where we could see one of the really strong political movements in the games community, I think by now maybe 10 years back. That was a concerted movement to exclude women and minorities from the games community. It is possible to say that because researchers have collected data and chat logs on 4chan of the people laying out their plan and then executing it and discussing that we will do this, we will set it up that way, we will use these arguments, we will spread these messages, right? Like they're planning it in the open. You can be on those websites and just take a screenshot whenever they say it and then share that, right? So it's documented. It's documented how that went down. We can see that as games users. This is a plan. There's even sort of a playbook or a way of using these sort of tactics to execute these sort of pre-media operations, right? And yes, some of these things that are happening there can be explained via political economy. Right? Media websites and platforms are oftentimes not controlling very well what kind of content they put out, and they make it easy by following up and serving more content based on what somebody has already watched to build these structures where viewers, where maybe young people that watch a gaming video that is slightly sexist without them realizing, next time gets served up something that is a little bit further in that direction. And if they still watch it, a little bit further, and a little bit further, and a little bit further. And in that way sort of sliding in these communities and then ending up in echo chambers where that is the only thing they end up seeing. So that is part of that system, right? This is this pipeline that he's referring to as well. But how does it get this far, right? So, also not yet. Feminist Frequency used to be, or still is, an activist in the games community. Or it's a YouTube channel or an organization, mostly built around Anita Sarkeesian, who is a feminist activist in the space. And one of the things that happened in Gamergate was an attack against Anita and her videos that were debunking anti-feminist or sexist tropes in video gaming. So that is not at all really sort of new stuff in media studies, cultural studies, or sociology. It's just, yes, of course. Being shown as radical perspectives, and then of course receiving this kind of hate mail on a daily basis, having talks cancelled, getting swatted, getting threatened, right? So these sort of threats on a daily basis. But that is just the most visible elements of this. Do you know what a dog whistle is? Right. Exactly. I'm going to yeah, okay, everybody knows, right? A way to communicate with a group in the know without that everybody else understands what's going on, right? So you're whistling, but only the people who understand this frequency can hear it. Everybody else hears nothing. So a secret communication method with your in-group. One example for a while was reframing the meaning of the OK sign as something like that, right? Like a sign, a dog whistle for white supremacy, or, these sort of political perspectives. It's sort of, the interesting thing about dog whistles is the more crazy they are, the more effective they can be, because it's very, very hard for the mainstream community or mainstream society to really, like, what? This is like a racist sign now? Why? How? That doesn't make any sense. No, exactly. That's why you can use it in the open, right? Here we have Milo Yiannopoulos, who became one of the spokespeople for Gamergate, using this together with a Trump hat. And as far as this went, him riding that wave of Gamergate pulled Breitbart News, which was before that a fairly obscure news website in the US, into somewhat of the conservative mainstream, ending up with Steve Bannon, who is running Breitbart, being one of the advisors of Donald Trump when he got into the White House. So he was riding that wave of neo-fascist sentiment to the center of US American power structures. This is how you can use a dog whistle. Right? If you don't get this pointed out, that a special police force team here is all making the same hand sign, this photo will just pass. But if you're in the know, then you go like, oh, okay, so, like, especially if you're in this group, like, these guys are with me. That's how it functions. So that is one of the elements in which this sort of communication happens in these spaces. There's also, and this is now, the trigger warning for anti-LGBTQ content. This is a screenshot from 4chan, which is an anonymous chat or website for message board on the internet, where a lot of fairly dark things get created. Take a look for a second and try to figure out what's going on here. So, right, we have what appears to be on the front some LGBTQ, ally, media, information, right? Like, love is ageless, and a nice rainbow picture. But it's not LGBTQ, it's LGBTP, standing for pedosexual, right? Flood Twitter with LGBTP and hashtag love is ageless. What is going on here is that this is an on-purpose attempt to frame the LGBTQ community as permitting pedophilia by creating something that isn't meant to be shared by conservatives or homophobic people. This is something that they want to smuggle into the hands of allies who share it, hopefully, from their perspective, hopefully by mistake without realizing what it is, so that afterwards from the outside it's possible to point at the LGBTQ community and say, look, we knew it all along, you harbor pedophiles. Right? This, it's good. It's well done. You need to really look a second time. Like, I think it could have been possible for me to see this in my flow somewhere and click a like. It's not out of the ordinary, right? That would be possible. And that's exactly what the point is. Come in. Right? So these sort of communication tactics is very difficult to say, yeah, media literacy, okay, pay close attention, what is going on. It's a tricky conversation to have, right? But so far, I'm still circling the pot here a little bit, right? What is at the center of this? Why am I saying that maybe media literacy is not quite enough? One of the relevant, necessary elements to creating something that has to do with like building a fascist or like a very sort of neoconservative movement like this is that you need some sort of outside threat. You need to manufacture that because oftentimes it doesn't really exist. So here we see elements of manufacturing a threat from the outside to typically young or white men, the young straight male gamers. These could be feminism or women, foreigners, immigrants, right, as a threat, liberals, communists, like diversity, queerness, wokeness, political correctness, even like climate scam could be a threat that we need to sort of react against that is threatening us. But all of these are entry points into the same funnel leading somewhere, right? And here we also get to the limits of media literacy. And now we get to the core of it. Media literacy as checking where a link comes from, or is this coming, is this really informed by a real news source, where this is coming from, bounces against its limits here. Because something like this LGBTQ sort of defamation campaign is very difficult to see through without really understanding what is going on and taking it apart in detail, right? Asking teachers and young people here to be critical to messages that are meant to appeal to them emotionally and make them feel good in a world that can be otherwise quite threatening and that can sometimes appear as if they are under threat, that is asking maybe too much of them, and it might be neglecting the situation in which teachers and young people are today. So this is my core example. This is where, from my perspective, most of this funnel is leading. Onboarding somebody with the threat of women are coming for your games, or some sort of threat like that, it needs to go somewhere else, right? We will get back to this diverse group standing in front of the Brandenburg Tor in a second. So let's take a look at this together. The great replacement of European Canadians is not a conspiracy theory. It is an undeniable fact supported by statistics that are provided by the government of Canada, right? So this is somebody from Canada arguing that European Canadians, like white people, are being replaced. They use statistics that in 1867, white, like European Canadians, were 98% of the population. Already interesting, they didn't start earlier than that, because there was a time when, and this is a big surprise, European Canadians were 0% of the Canadian population. So then we have 1971, okay, so only 96. Today, European Canadians, whatever that may be, right, it's huge black box here as well, is 72% of the population. And then we have projections for 2036 and for 2100, where the poor European Canadians will have reduced to only 20%. This is, this theory, this argument is called the Great Replacement. It looks something like that. It's a fear, it's an attack on white people. This is a story that in Germany you would find low-key still going on quite frequently, right? I could easily find people talking about that. Yeah, we survived, whatever, like sometimes. But now all these Muslims and Turkish people and brown people are coming and they're fucking us out of existence. They have so many more kids than we do, and soon there won't be any Germans left anymore, right? Like different shapes of the same story. White people are being replaced. And I mean, it looks kind of scary. They're coming for us. Wow, there's just a few pockets of resistance left. What are we going to do about it? So here comes the interesting question. Using the media literacy that we combined as educated people probably have in this room, what's going on here? Like, is this true? I mean, it uses statistics from the government of Canada.
Cherry picking.
It is cherry picking, definitely, and projecting a casual 80 years into the future is not a good idea. But there's something else going on, right? I mean, you're correct, right? This is already there. It's a fool's errand. But there's something else going on, and that's the interesting thing, that based on its own logics here, this is correct. Why?
Is it like propaganda when they insert 10% of truth and then cover it with 90% of lies so it looks believable, and then they kind of...
Yeah, like covering a lie between truth, right? I think that's part of the topic here, right? The interesting way of doing that here is by presenting people as a binary, right? You're either white or black, which I'm not sure that's not how people are. It's the core sort of magic trick that makes it possible to present the world like this is lying in the definition of whiteness. Whiteness is not a real concept for describing how human beings are. At its core, whiteness as a notion of human beings is the absence of race. That's why critical race theorists talk about racified people versus non-racified people. That matches my experience. I, for the first time, learned that my race is called Caucasian when I sent a master application to a Singaporean university, and they asked me what race I am, and I'm like, I have a race? At that point, I was already having a bachelor degree in media studies. So it took me a long time to even ever, this is not going to happen to a racified person. They'll know what race they are, because it's an inescapable everyday fact of their lived experience. So whiteness is the absence of race. That means that when a white person and a racified person have a child together, this child is racified. It's not white anymore. Whiteness has been lost in this process. Whiteness can only ever be lost or preserved. It can't be gained back. That means that if we consider this as a systematic logic, right? If we have a planet full of white people, and then we add one racified person, and we just let that simulation run, and they have kids together, at some point, what? The entire population is going to be black? Yeah, based on this system, that's what would happen, even though, obviously, that is ridiculous. Whiteness, in the way it is currently defined, is a means to justify slavery and racial exploitation and colonialism. But we still sort of colloquially use it as our way of seeing the world. That's why it functions. Right? The way whiteness and race is defined allows this argument to function, at least in the heads of people who can see it this way. It manufactures a threat on people that are in power. It's not that even white supremacists really see the world this way. There's research in how white supremacists react to getting the results of their genetic analysis, right? So they take a swipe, send it to 23andMe, get their results back, and of course, it turns out they are, what, like 10% Native American and 15% African, right? Because that's how people are, right? And then they go back to their online community and say, oh my God, I'm not white. It's like, yeah, A, of course not. And B, then their community goes like, but come on, you know, you're one of us. Your genes don't decide who you are, you know, you come back to, and it's like, what? You're white supremacists, and suddenly you're wholesomely not saying that your genes don't decide who you are. That's like, I mean, nice, I guess, but also what's going on, right? Like, so in reality, we accept sort of like a white enough measure for whiteness, right? Like, I am white in Germany. I am whitish here, like still white, but not Swedish, not quite white enough. Maybe when I go to South America for a conference or something, man, I am white. Like I am a gringo, you know, like just hopeless in this, you know, it's very contextual. But so it's not like they really take this as a way of understanding themselves, but as a tool for manufacturing a threat. So from a social science perspective, what we are doing here is we are trying to understand discourse, right? We're understanding the framing of a particular concept and the way we can see the world through that. That would mean that we are using some sort of Foucauldian perspective on knowledge, right? The production of truth is thoroughly imbued with relations of power. The power here lies in the way in which you can tell the story about the world, in which you can define, for example, race. And that allows you to set up these sort of arguments. So now we're coming back from this dark place a little bit. But why did I mention this in the first place? Wherever your entry point is, right? Like there's two things. A, critical digital media literacy education is absolutely central to maintaining democracy and also for us to make better game communities, but it might not be enough. Because this conversation that we just had here, that is less about media literacy and checking where a link comes from. It's more about philosophy of knowledge. Like this is an epistemology conversation, right? So that is not necessarily part of that. And we don't have a lot of this. I mean, I was like, I don't know, this many years old when I understand this thing for the first time, and I'm literally a media professor. We do this with our master students, and I was like, okay, right, that works. Expecting young people to make this connection, or even teachers to be able to lead them through that, That's a tough ask. This is good propaganda. It's the end point that enables many entry points for this funnel. Whether or not you are a QAnon follower, whether or not you're somebody who sees feminism as a threat, like many young men, because feminism is somehow the reason why they don't get access to women. That's, I think, typically the story there. Or whether or not you are somebody who sees feminism as something to be defended, right? That would be another entry point, the story that really sexism is getting imported to Sweden by Muslim men, and before immigration, Sweden, beautiful Sweden, didn't have sexism, which is one of the arguments Sverigedemokraterna are making, right? Like, it doesn't, they're obviously contradictory. It doesn't matter, it's propaganda. It's not meant to be correct or make sense. It's meant to invoke an emotional reaction to get people to enter the funnel. And once you buy and swallow one of those, well, now you have an idea about the world that's incorrect, but you want to maintain that because you have emotional energy and part of your identity invested in that. So you need the next fix, the next thing that makes this somehow make sense. You don't like vaccines? So all doctors are lying to you? Why? Because they want to remove white people. There's another round to the Great Replacement, and that is really sort of the darkest one. I sort of skipped this one, but I think it's maybe even necessary. When the Great Replacement is brought up in these circles, it is part of good old anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The logic here then often becomes that white people are supreme and more intelligent than people of color, but there's a population that is even smarter, and these are Jews. And the big plan of the Jewish population is to arrive at a planet that's easier to control by replacing all the whites with people of color. So there's a white genocide, a great replacement happening, orchestrated by shadowy elites that are trying to replace the white population with people of color so that they have an easier time controlling the planet, right? Great, so now I can slot in, why are people giving me quicksilver vaccines? Oh, because they want to eradicate your race. Okay. That could make sense, right? Like, so it's becoming the motivation. It's a means of mainstreaming neo-fascist and racist ideals. This is the thing that allows these diverse groups that have otherwise quite contradictory notions, like some sort of internet conspiracy theory together with Reichsbürger in Germany who claim that the Federal Republic doesn't exist and it's still this Deutsche Reich that we really should be part of, right? Like, okay, interesting. How do you fit together to have some sort of common enemy, some sort of common threat? What can we do about it? So one of the biggest things that we, I think, can do about it is supporting civil society. We will talk about this here in the panel soon. It's about coming together and making culture, creating spaces where people can be part of communities where, in a sense, the aim isn't really to necessarily give the information and the education to be able to disarm these discourses, but to give people another community that can give them meaning. Replace the vacuum that is otherwise filled by these conspiracy theories with something else that is meaningful to them, that gives them a voice and that gives them stakes and the possibility to participate in something meaningful, right? Treat them as people and as humans, not necessarily only as customers. For school, we need to work towards critical literacy and making, ideally beyond, not excluding coding and becoming like people that are literate with IT, but that shouldn't be the only reason why we include critical literacy and critical digital literacy. Learn more about games culture, and we need to take this conversation up, because if we don't, then yes, we create this vacuum that other people can fill. We might offer more support to make materials for teachers and materials for educators, because this is a difficult conversation to have. As from policy perspectives, critical literacy should be a central part of digital media education. It should happen where young people already are, right? Supporting, for example, Puma, supporting social workers that are already doing the good work here. We need to educate civil society, and we need the citizen education, but we cannot replace teachers and social workers with something else, like games or anything else. We are already having these people that are holding our democratic society together being more and more strained by bigger classes, by defunded social work, by defunding these sort of budgets. So I think one of the most important things we can do is actually funding education. Organizations in Sweden are already actually quite well prepared. Spelvärden has material that addresses critical perspectives on information online. Mediarådet is doing really well. Internetstiftelsen is really one of the organizations that are doing this sort of work already. I'm not sure if their material, as far as I see, and when I checked the last time, goes as far as this analysis that we did today here. I think it stops a little bit earlier, and I think I would like to fix that. But when I talk to teachers about this, they're like, yeah, I know there's good material out there, but there's no way that I find space and time in my class to bring that in. It's just, like, I cannot fit that, right? I'm just making sure that I get everybody above the minimum necessary level, and that's as much as I can afford. And then we as a university, we need to engage and we need to be relevant. We would like to work with this. We would like to offer our expertise in a way that makes sense. It's not always easy because the initiatives at university is to create and write more papers for the ivory tower so that this handful of other researchers can read it. But of course, that's not enough. So we need to engage with this. Not engaging is even worse, right? I think there's a sentiment at the university that we're sort of safe and we get to keep doing what we want and academic freedom. That's not how this works. Like, we have skin in this game as well. Like, as soon as we get a even more conservative government, that academic freedom to even have these conversations, even at the university, will go away. So yes, lots to do. It is a very, very complex problem. The political economy of media ecosystems is one element. Platform capitalism, yes, commodification of culture. Fascism as a comorbid element where other things are already going wrong and it hooks into the problems and pain points of young people to extend that. But also, and this is sort of as a last point, in a sense, I'm talking about teaching people to not smoke and then accepting that we have cigarettes in society. Right? Maybe it's even an interesting point to think about that we could remove or do something about this communication ecosystem that we have set up, where it is possible to present these perspectives, this propaganda without any repercussions, and really think about if we want to reorganize social media in society. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I think that would be a long-term goal to think about the infrastructure that we use to build our democratic societies on. Thank you so very much. All right. What are your questions? Per.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, building on your conclusions, and you talked about algorithms, and I think that's very much in the spotlight of radicalization, and you talked about platform capitalism. I don't know about your public service social media. I think that rather than argue with that, I'd like to offer another idea, which is if we look at the legacy media, the classic media, there is freedom of speech, but there's also an ambition to truth, which comes from the profession of journalists and their education and their communities, and there's media about media, and they have boards, not oversight, but they have self-regulatory boards where you can make appeals, and there's like a process. So they have an ambition to truth, which is also an ambition to avoid lies and propaganda. Also, there is formal things in law, and there's for the public broadcast radio, there's an agreement with the government that gives them access to ether, etc. There's all kinds of systems that have this directional travel that they want to have as much of the truth as possible and as little of the lies as possible. The regulation is different for social media. I don't know if you're aware of the Communications Decency Act of 1996 in the United States and the Section 230. If you're not aware of this, look it up. The Section 230 is what gives the tech companies immunity immunity from liability for what their users do.
Exactly.
So as long as they have a process for banning users, they don't have to take responsibility for what's being put into the public on their platforms, which is quite opposite from the system I just described with the legacy media. And that also is in European law with the European Telecoms Act, the e-commerce directive of 2003, has similar rights. So intermediary privilege or immunity. if we would take a page from the legacy media and apply it to the new media. I'm sure that they would have consequences for business models and technology, etc. But I'm not sure that the reason why the algorithms are the way that they are and promote radicalization in many cases is because of any technological necessities. I think that part of it is also because the regulation is set up this way.
I think that would be another interesting access point. I think we have missed big time the importance of social media for our democratic societies, where when broadcasting became a thing, we understood that this is going to shape how our countries and democracies work in the future, and our states took care of that. Of course, we can criticize that as well, and my perspective here is that of an otherwise somewhat free society in Sweden, right? Government oversight is not a good solution in Russia, right? So it's from that perspective like a rock and a hard place, obviously, and public service wouldn't work in that setting either because it wouldn't be independent from government. Multi or like infranational organizations like the European Union could be something that would be useful here, and I think a law that you propose there could be a step in the right direction. I think it could be other things like making sure that people have the right to be forgotten or ownership over their own data, where people have a public service cloud where they can store their own things and then maybe give access to social media to present that information and hook them in. Like there could be a lot of alternative versions to this that would strengthen the need to tell the truth and be that. The thing that makes me a little bit pessimistic about that is that even in legacy media, journalism is dying because it doesn't get funding, right? So that makes me gravitate towards public service because at least that provides a somewhat stable business model to even make sure that journalists get to eat, which is right now not happening in local media or in these sort of spaces where you have constant deadlines, and that there's another pressure here. But yes, it is a difficult challenge, and yeah, we don't have a ready-made solution yet. White papers, like, professional integrity and best practices would also go away in that direction. I don't see that happening at Facebook anytime soon. But thank you. We have time for maybe we don't, because we need to get...
We need to get the panelists in and...
Yes, exactly. I'll be around, and we will have a panel that is about this topic. So if we want to have more questions or more discussion, or if this is interesting for you, then please stick around. I really appreciate you going through this with me, because this was not a light and easy topic. And thank you so much.